I'll just give it a second to start up here. Hi, everyone. I am incredibly excited to be joined here by Marie Newman, the former congresswoman from Illinois. She is also a nonprofit CEO, a podcaster, an author, has really done like some fantastic work, both in politics and outside, really, helping defend communities and also published a tremendous piece this morning, actually, on the Gen Z affordability crisis. Marie, it's so great to have you here on the American Inequality newsletter.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. And this has been a long time in coming topic. It's before you and I decided to collaborate. Believe me, I had been thinking this has been rolling around in my head because I live it every day with my kids. They're both Gen Z. So thrilled to have the conversation.
Yeah, and I know you wrote a little bit about that like personal experience, yeah, in the newsletter, and it's also just so important. I think as much data we provide on things, right, like incorporating the stories of people who are kind of like going through that, and kids and stuff as well. And one of the things that you kind of mentioned in there was particularly about like jobs and the workforce and finding jobs. So can you talk a little bit about like as you've been thinking about some of this, workforce challenges that Gen Z, is going through. We see a lot of this in charts and data and kind of some of these
Right.
surveys. Like, yeah, what did you kind of come across? Anything that surprised you, or you're like, this is actually, what we're seeing in
Well,
the economy now?
sadly and pointedly, nothing surprised me in the data. As I was pulling it up and my team and I were going over it and vetting it, was very, it was validated time and time again by another source, right? So it's clear, the data's clear,
Yeah.
right? That just as a starting point, Gen Z has triple the unemployment of millennials. Triple. That that means something is very desperately wrong at the roots of our economy. And when people say it's rigged on both sides of the aisle, it is right. And let's be clear: we have entered an oligarchy. We have, and you can redefine it however you want, and put a little soft shoe on it, and maybe some Vaseline on the mirror, and all those things. But it's an oligarchy, and we have to get after this now. In fact. Um, I'm going to be having some discussions with a wide variety of folks on my Substack Live about how do we reverse all these horrible policies. So to say that I was surprised is not accurate. In fact, it didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I know it's unfortunate that this is like becoming, this reality and that we're, kind of like, moving into this world where it's, kind of the situation. But, I think as we were kind of going through some of the data, one of these interesting things was how, the unemployment rate for recent college grads is now higher than it is for regular workers. Basically a shift that we have never really seen before. You generally think that, recent college grads have been developing the skill sets that they need in college, to kind of prepare them for the workforce. We now see so many, people kind of coming out of college without those skills, entering a space where they aren't really sure where to fit in. Like, can you talk about like how you're, have you been thinking about like this? There's so much talk about like the college wage premium, and is this,
Yeah,
the
it's
obligation of college really still there for some of these young workers?
yeah, and I think that that's part of the transformation conversation, right? Is that
Yeah.
so for me, while I'm a huge fan of our university system, our public colleges, our public universities, our private universities, love all of them. Um, I don't know as though moving forward, everybody should have a 4-year degree. I think that's silly and not necessarily a good fit for them personally, but is it good for the economy to have everybody going through taking out a 4-year chunk, learning some things and not going through some other training programs that may have helped them move their career along, right? So for me, I would love to see this integrated system where we have a stronger community college program that has 6-month, 1 year, and 2 year degrees and training programs that can get you to a level in the economy where you can, start to have equity in your home, start to, be able to save for your retirement and all of those important things. So college is too expensive. We have to re-engineer how we think about college or secondary degrees. We have to re-engineer how we think about employment. Part of this is that university leaders, teachers, and training programs are not talking to employers and talking the same language. They're not coming together and saying, hey, we've got this role, and it'd be great if you had these classes, these training things, and help these kids understand X. That conversation isn't happening, and we really need that to happen.
Why do you think it's not happening? Like that feels like, an obvious like mismatch in the market, right?
Yeah.
Where you can say like, just have the, entry level employers start talking to those colleges more to say, what do you need from us? Um, or do you think that's happening in some communities and not others? Like it feels like a low hanging fruit on that.
Right? Doesn't it? I mean, I think there's a couple things is that there probably are some good cases that I'm not aware of, so God
Yeah.
bless, Godspeed. But largely, like, when I was in Congress, that was one of the things I do is I would bring the community colleges and the standard 4 year degrees together with employers and sit down and say, look, what do you really need for this person to be able to do when they enter your doorstep, right? And it was a really great conversation. I learned a lot, right? And so honestly, part of that learning, then I sat both my kids down when they're going into interviews and say, hey, what do you want me to be able to do when I get to your doorstep? What
Right.
exactly? And so it's impressive to then employers are like, oh wow, you really want to be ready, right? So this is a two-way street. Kids have to demand it, and I'm asking my kids to demand it. And then I think universities have to sit down in communities and talk with employers to understand, and then heads of industry too. So there should
Right.
be in each of the big categories. So I would love to see, and honestly, I think that that's incumbent around community leaders and politicians to start facilitating that conversation.
Yeah, and I think you're starting to see some of it happen, around, bachelor degree requirements, right, for jobs. Like so many job listings now, right, say that they require a bachelor's when in fact none of the skill sets, actually really require someone to have gone to college for that. But,
Right.
there was this, pretty groundbreaking, report that actually just came out yesterday from the Schultz Family Foundation that talked a lot about what employment opportunities are looking like for, Gen Z, and folks coming out of college. And it said something like, 43%, of students are unsure about the job market. I think it was like 48% said that they don't feel like they have enough job prospects. But one of the most shocking stats that I kind of saw in this was that 77% of employers require 1 year of, job experience before
Yeah.
applying for an entry level job, but only 38% of those employers actually offered an internship. And so they were requiring people to have all of this job experience, but weren't actually giving them any of the channels to be able to get that. And so trying to
Right.
like break down some of those barriers, think about what are those skills that they need, and trying to create more of that, like college to education pipeline. I want to go back to one thing you had kind of alluded to, which, as we're talking about, some of these like challenges that recent grads and kind of new, employees are facing is, just like the burden that they can sometimes feel coming out of college. So I know, in the piece as well, you had written quite a bit about student debt and sort of some of that, kind of crippling challenges that can come with, workers not only right after they graduate, but for years, if not, decades later.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about like, yeah, what you kind of found in that work, how,
Yeah.
any work that you had done to try and address some of that crisis?
Well, now just in a 15-year period in 2010 with the average debt was hovering, I think, around 24,000. Now it's 36 to 40,000 is the average debt load coming out of college. But the wages are lower
Right.
relative to the cost of living, right? So now they're in this horrible crunch. They have this big burden on their back. And by the way, this is really affecting the mental health of this age group really deeply because it's demoralizing, right? And so what I'm often doing when I'm mentoring folks in that age frame is, half the time I'm playing psychologist and cheerleader saying, yeah, we can do this, but it is a big, tough road, right? So the compression, the downward compression and the upward compression is deafening right now, and from an economic perspective. So what I'm telling these kids is, honestly, you might want to think about tethering together a gig job and your regular job,
Mm.
until you can figure out a job that, can really be one of your career builders, right? And honestly, my son does that. He does a gig job and he has a job in his space. He was the victim of Trump cuts back in late December, early January, because they had to cut knowing that Trump was coming in. And and it took him 2.5, 3 months because he hustled real hard. But during that time, and I'm so proud of him, he was super resourceful, is that he took 3 jobs, cobbled the 3
Wow.
jobs together to make rent, right? And I was like, "God bless you," so that's the heartbreak, right? Is that they're spending all of this time and energy and mental, emotional energy on this thing that shouldn't be this hard. Like, of course, it's hard to get a job. It should be hard to get a job. We should, all want to work and work a good, solid 40-hour week. But we shouldn't be in a position where we're having to work 2 jobs and working 80 hours a week just to make rent. Just to make rent. I mean, that's insane. That's not what our bodies are built to do. So for me, we have to get to a space where, we're fixing equity in healthcare. We're fixing job wages. We're getting, we need a $20 minimum wage. I mean, let's just be clear. Bring DEI back. And what everybody forgets is DEI leavened things a bit, and now it's all out of balance and chaotic again. So bringing DEI back. And then going after these price gougers, particularly in pharmaceutical and in financial services. Go after them and give them guardrails. They don't have any guardrails right now. Um, and then just bringing some humanity back to this country would be great. So
That
so
would be
for
great.
me, having it's an emotional topic because it's my kids.
Yeah, and I think it's such a, I don't know, an underappreciated point too, that we talk so much about, like, the financial guidance and, these like paths to employment and paths to like paying off debt and debt forgiveness, but we don't give enough credit to the like, yeah, mental health calamity, that can kind of come from that. And, kind of like all of the interconnected issues that can, emerge from this too, right? It's such a big part of like what we cover in the newsletter is that like, these issues that they're like, oh, this is just a housing issue, or this is just an education issue, or this is just a healthcare issue, like really weave together. And so, these, student debt issues that become mental health issues, right? You might end up taking on a ton of medical debt as a result of that. And medical debt is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the US. So then you find yourself, unable to get a credit card, your credit score tanks, you're not able to get a home because of that, layered on top of your medical and student debt. And so things can spiral out of control, pretty quickly for folks on that. And so trying to do enough to like stem the problem, upstream of things, because yeah, there's, very, real challenges and real people who can, suffer in the meantime. Um, so you had also talked a bit about like, the cost of living and sort of this like, compression, of wages. I'd also just mentioned, $20 minimum rate wage. We often hear just about the, $15. And I'm glad to hear, like setting the bar a bit higher, because in so many places, 15 isn't even close to a living wage. Often in, some of America's most rural areas, the living wage is actually even higher because the cost of getting groceries out there, getting resources out there can really go higher. So can you talk a little bit more, about what you found in some of this cost of living work, how you're
Yeah.
thinking about like why we need to now up level, the conversation on the $20 minimum wage?
So let's kind of set the landscape, right? Is that people don't understand what an average day looks like for an average human in the US. By the way, almost 60% of the country has more than one job right now. Right around 50% of the country effectively, plus or minus, lives paycheck to paycheck. That's an anomaly in our history since
Yeah.
that has been recorded, right? So those are all the signs. This is fixable, right? This is highly fixable. If we move the living wage up, then folks give back to the economy. They pay taxes, they buy eggs and gas and TVs and iPhones and all the things, right? So in order to protect our society, we have to invest in our people, right? So, having a fair wage, and it is no longer, we started the $15 wage war 15 years ago. Guess what?
Yeah.
It's risen. That need has risen quite a bit. So it's really, I think it's a $20 a wage. And that benefits everybody. That raises all boats. That doesn't create, everybody thinks, oh, well, that's going to kill small business. Well, it's not if, in fact, we get the supply chain in a place where we're leavened out, which is, let's don't not even get started on the tariff war, because that will grossly affect it in the coming days, weeks, and years. So for me, and then providing healthcare for this entire country, we will save so much money by having a single payer. And it will be better care, and it will be more accessible care. So if we have all of the other things at a reasonable rate, and you have income at a reasonable rate, those small businesses will benefit as well. And I used to be a small business owner. Look, I don't think small businesses should be paying the same tax as a large business. It used to drive me crazy as a small business, because my income was my profits, and my profits were my income, and my revenue was my income, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's all one thing. It's not like, oh, there's this other pool over here. So for me, I felt like I was getting double taxed as a business and a person all the time. So I strongly believe in pulling up all boats works the best. Our economy will be stronger.
Can you talk a bit though, like about your, I don't know, personal experience in Congress, like trying to advocate for some of these changes, right? Like this narrative of, rising tide lifting all boats, and, like how,
Yeah.
we need to be able to afford eggs and stuff. Like so many of the solutions that, kind of present in like the path forward section, many of them are done at the like,
Yeah.
federal, state level.
It's
We talk a lot about individuals and nonprofits, but like, I don't know if there are any like stories or times where you're like, I tried to do this and I came up across this opposition and like I had to battle through this, because I think trying to have, folks understand like how they can actually go about implementing some of these changes, and what, folks, in Congress are working on, and also like what's the evidence that they're using to try and draw from that. Like hearing from a real congressperson on that will be great.
well, let me start with just the cold, harsh reality of it, is that we have to get into a situation where our members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are not beholden to corporations. We must get corporate PAC money out of government and politics. They drive everything. I will tell you, I saw it any number of times when, we'd try to put price gouging, anti-price gouging together. And let's look at our current antitrust laws, right? They aren't even enforced.
Yeah.
These huge behemoth companies can all get together and own a marketplace and monopolize it. We have lots of monopolies out there right now. So at the end of the day, I will just tell you, the root cause is that there is too much corporate PAC money, and there shouldn't be any in our politics and in our government, because lots of members of Congress, and they say that they don't. Do not believe them. By the way, everybody on this call, stop believing you're a member of Congress that say, "Oh, I don't make decisions about that." Well, then why don't we have reasonable priced pharmaceuticals? Why does healthcare cost what it is? Why does healthcare insurance cost what it is? When actually healthcare insurance companies aren't even really a necessity. They were brought on in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and they used to be nonprofits. Just to be clear, like, just remember, everybody, they used to be a nonprofit system, and everything was a lot more reasonable then. So if drugs and medication and therapies are all super expensive, our groceries are expensive, our manufacturing is expensive, why is that? Is because corporations are owning our Congress, and they aren't making laws that, in fact, will combat that. So we need people in Congress who will not take, I'm getting low on battery, so I'm just going to do a little surgery on my phone here. Sorry about that.
No, no,
Um,
no. Yeah. And I know
so
this was
yeah,
one of the
so
things
yeah,
that,
so at the end of the day, it's, if you want a real solution, get corporate PAC money out of politics, and we're going to all of a sudden have not too much regulation, but enough regulation where we're not dying or getting sicker because we can't afford medication, food, or housing.
yeah. So, I mean, very much so that, like, lobbying and kind of like, these much larger forces that kind of, prevent, politicians and members of Congress from, making the like decisions that they might want to make otherwise. And I know this specifically came up, in, the work that we were collaborating on together about like how we can get, more, members of Gen Z, into Congress
Yeah.
and into elected positions, not just at the federal level. And yeah, some of that is, I think not only like, yeah, these very entrenched, powers that be and how people get funded to get into these roles, but I feel like it probably also needs to be, complemented by just larger, campaign finance reforms that make it
So
so that it's not so incredibly expensive to run because, as much as we want to, talk about, getting more members of, Gen Z into these elected, positions, we spent, so much of this conversation talking about, student debt and low wages and high costs of living and stuff. And so thinking about, how you can, even afford to run is, such a challenge in the US. And I think a really daunting hill for many young people who would otherwise want to like, contribute to public service, but, find the like price tag or what they imagine the price tag to be
yeah,
too overwhelming.
I have people coming to me all the time that I actually think would be excellent candidates, but they can't self fund and they don't see a path forward. And it breaks my heart because I like the blend in any case. I like the blend. So there are some. So for me right now, our leadership in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate um, need to move on. They do, and they need to allow some younger blood in. And it's, I think there should be some guardrails around that. I don't think that there's a certain age at which you probably shouldn't be in Congress because it is very rigorous work and takes a lot of energy. And then the second piece is we need new ideas. We need it to be like, so I used to run R&D and innovation groups inside companies and help them come up with
Mm.
new products and services, right? And so I'd help them in the brainstorm stage. It's like, okay, here's our problem. Here's because there's always a gap or a problem, right? That we're always solving for. And so in that situation, we need people with new ideas that have had lived experience of said idea. So that's what I want is I want working families candidates. I want Gen Z and millennial candidates, and I want some Gen Xers that have had a specific set of problems that they have solved. So they bring that all to Congress. It's very robust, and we can all talk about it and come up with great solutions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think we're really like lacking that. I think in particular, like the Democratic Party has really like moved away from a lot of that as well, and there's a lot of like talk in support of it, but we very much so don't see it. Um, I know one thing that you did, advocate a lot for, while you were in Congress was around gun rights and common sense gun control. On Monday, did another, Substack Live with Sarah Beth Rosenberg, who had been, a New York City public school teacher for 23 years. She runs, Teachers Unified to End Gun Violence, and that conversation was, I don't know, very powerful, very harrowing as well. Even, not just, talking about school shooters, but the trauma that students feel from the drills that they have to do. And one area that I had thought much less about, that Sarah gave me, greater appreciation for is all of the teachers as well, who are also, survivors, of these, attacks. And,
Yeah,
we think so much about, the students, particularly because they're young and it's so traumatic. But I just personally have thought less about, this other group that is also,
yeah,
very much so had to unite. Um, but also in this conversation about like the strength of lobbyists, for like influencing change, like, the NRA, very powerful, though, losing, power, I think year by year, though I'd be curious if you would, agree with that, characterization. Like, yeah, how was, trying to work on some of that? Like, school shootings, are also a very controversial topic somehow because, there's the, idea that like we need actually more guns because the only way to stop a shooter is a good guy, with a good gun, or we need to arm teachers. Like, can you talk a bit about, yeah, I see you shaking your head about the like, craziness that is this. Like, yeah, I would love to hear your
yeah.
thoughts.
So I've been in the gun reform movement for almost 30 years, right? And we were making tremendous progress up until about 8 years ago. We had Moms Demand Action, which is the organization I was part of, but I had been involved with other organizations prior to its advent. we had something like 30 state gun laws that were very specific around red flag laws and preventing kids and folks that are mentally ill, severely mentally ill, to have guns. We had ammunition and storage and safety gun laws. So like 30 of them across 30 states, right? Then Trump came in and started to reverse things. The one, I just have to point this out to your audience, is that the one that sent me over the edge is part of this big, beautiful bill, which is actually just a betrayal bill, is that they have now taken the restrictions away from silencers. So let me just ask you a question. When do you think a hunter, someone who just enjoys target practice, or someone that is lawfully doing a lawful activity, when do you need a silencer?
Yeah, both the silencer and I think they got rid of made it easier for sawed-off shotguns as well.
Yeah.
And so it's
So
like,
when do those groups, the lawful groups, the sportsmen, hunter, folks that just like target practice, or people that want to keep it in their home for safety, those are the four big lawful groups. Like, who needs a silencer and why?
yeah,
Nobody. The answer
no,
is nobody.
right.
So A, they shouldn't exist, but B, to make it lawful to have any group have a silencer is oh my gosh, that made my blood boil. So that's just one example. So and that is an example of things being repealed and clawed back where we had made significant progress. So it's a heartbreak for me to watch it. And this is back to money in politics. It's the exact same thing. So, gun companies and the gun lobby are paying off primarily Republicans. I don't think any Democrats take gun money anymore. But it's another situation why we are where we are, is that these corporations tell members of Congress, you must do this, and here are your talking points. And now you can't put legislation forth on this topic because it'll hurt us. So it's the oligarchy premise, right? In an oligarchy, corporations tell government how to operate, and then the oligarchs stay fat and happy and wealthy, and all of the citizens don't. So it,
So
it keeps going back to money in politics. I know I sound like a broken record, but it is.
no, but I think if we like take this to the extreme, right, which is, like, let's imagine, right, or imagine a world where our, kind of politicians or Congress is fully unable to act, kind of like through the will of the people because they are so, beholden to these like large powers.
Yeah.
Who goes about bringing about systemic change, right? I think we've so often like relied on the federal government to do that because I think giant projects like, you know, climate change, reforms to immigration, right? Marriage laws, like those are things that need to happen at the federal level. So,
Yeah.
how do we go about, doing some of this? And I know you had also written that powerful piece as well about like, as we were dealing, with a lot of these, ICE raids and immigration challenges, like the communities that you see needing to step up, like who are the people who can kind of be some of these like real systems change makers?
Guess what? It's you and I. Let me just be clear with everybody on this chat today. We are all leaders. We all have to lead. Right now, we're in a situation where, we've had a hostile takeover of this authoritarian government figure and his acolytes. And our own, Democratic leadership is paralyzed for some reason. I'm very frustrated with that. I empathize with them, but they are paralyzed and they're not serving it. So guess what? And this happens frequently throughout history, is that when there is a dramatic change like that, people rise up. Unusual leaders come forward. They emerge and they go forward. So look at this movement we have right now. Rank and file Americans have put boycotts together that have really, really handicapped companies. Amazon has something like 20% less traffic. Tesla stock down 71%. Target is down, I think, $8 and $9 billion a month since we started the boycott. So boycotts work. Protests work. The first big protest, April 5th, we had 4.5 million people out. Last one we had in June was 6 million. And this Saturday on the 17th, everybody get your walking shoes out. The 17th is the next protest. Go to indivisible.org. We'll probably, I would say, have 8, 9 million, right? So we are going to save us. Nobody's coming to save us. We are going to save us. So take a hold. Call your Republican senators and members of Congress and tell them that you don't like this. But also tell your Democratic leaders, like, look, get a backbone and put a plan together. Because once we do take power, and I believe we will again in 2026, we've got to start to re-engineer, not just bring it all back, but bring it back better in a way where it is put together so that it is stronger and better and more appropriate for the times, right? So I'm excited about the future, but it is on us, Jeremy. It's on everybody on this call.
Um, I have a very tactical question, which is,
Sure.
you're like, calling, your senator, your congress people makes a difference. Like, what does that look like when I call and I leave a voicemail or I tweet at someone? Like, do you get a report that says like, hey, I've gotten, 30 voicemails and they seem to be about this issue? Like, what are the staffers
Yeah.
putting together to let you know that that's making a difference?
So excellent question. What they're required to do, House rules requires that you document all of your calls and all of your emails. So those two things are important. It is
Calls
also
and emails.
yeah. So first calls are most powerful because I'll tell you, sadly, it annoys the staff, and then the staff complain to the principal, to the member of Congress, and that is most impactful. I'm just telling everybody on this call that
No,
And
it's
by the
very
way,
helpful to know. Yeah.
team here, team inequality here, we do not, you do not need to know policy. You need to know your story. So let me give you an example. You're calling Congresswoman X because you don't like the Medicaid cuts. And the story is real simple. Again, yeah, I just need to let you know I'm not voting for you and I will work against you because my mom is in a nursing home that is funded by Medicaid and she's not going to have that now. And I'm very angry. And then hang up the phone. Be respectful and kind and gracious and all those
Right.
things. But like, let her know, just tell your one thing. Just tell them the one thing. You do not need to be a data expert or a policy expert. You can just say, look, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to vote you out and I'm going to work real hard on that. And I'm going to support someone that supports me and my mom.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, fantastic advice and also very helpful tactical advice too, with knowing how this works. Because, yeah, I think, I don't know, people put a lot of, I don't know, like barriers for why they wouldn't call. Are worried what they'll say. Like,
Don't be worried.
exactly. I think
No
the
one
advice,
cares if you stutter or you stammer or you don't know what you're talking about. You
right.
do know what is upsetting you. Everybody knows what's upsetting you. Tell your story that's upsetting you.
Yeah, and I think the fact that so often, I mean, having made a lot of these calls myself, that so often no one actually really picks up until leaving
Yes,
the
sir.
mail, and yeah, but yeah, knowing that calls are very important, knowing that emails are very
And I
important.
will tell you in the hierarchy, showing up at a member of Congress's office is very compelling and being clear and demanding. Before I ever got into politics, in the 2010s, I sat in a politician's office for 7 hours because I was like, oh no, I'll just work here. I've got my laptop.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to do that too. Sit in their office and let them know you must speak to them. Everybody has 15 minutes. Everybody does.
Yeah, that's very true, and I think also, I think another, call to this group is not only, like sharing your own personal story, but knowing that, many of us like may have the time that other people like, can't afford or don't have. Like, thinking about all those people, we were talking about in the beginning of the call, we're working two, three jobs to kind of, afford, supporting their kids, and so to the ability that others, can stand up for folks, can really make a big difference.
And
Um,
I'll just extend that point for a quick minute, Jeremy, is that the immigration thing is real. The, many of these ICE and DHS agents are rent-a-cops that have never been trained. They don't know what they're doing. They don't have a badge, and they don't formally belong to any federal agency. So, in my column, I think I wrote last week, what I said is that we all have to step up, and don't put yourself in danger. Obviously, if someone's pointing a gun at you, but you can get in the middle of it. And as a short white woman, it is very compelling to go up to them and ask them for their ID. If they have a warrant, what is their reason for harassing this person that you're harassing? And staying there until you get a warrant or a judge's order, an ID or a badge or something. and staying with that person. So let's all be here to serve each other and protect each other.
Yeah, I think that's like an incredibly, powerful message, I think, for us to like, wrap up with because yeah, trying to figure out how we can be there for each other, the specific things that we can do because, this work, right? I kind of got feedback very early on with American inequality that, so much discussion about, inequality can feel depressing. It can, feel really challenging, particularly this interwoven nature of the work, right? And so remembering that there are things to do, that there is a path forward, that like the data shows this works less well, and we can observe from this community and in these situations. And so that's really powerful. And I think, you know,
Mhm.
what you had also said too, which is like drawing from your own experience and
Mhm.
thinking about this and I don't know, your own journey to Congress, like I think really rings true for, a lot of folks in this. And I know I do want to give, a plug as well, for your book, A Life Made from Scratch, because um yeah, I think just people understanding, kind of this work that you can do and also what it takes to, start bringing communities together. It's a fantastic piece of work. And I know we had also spent a little bit talking about book world. I'm working on a book as well. It's a journey, and yours is fantastic. So
Yeah, no, and God bless on that journey. And I know I'm very excited to read. I like the premise of your book a lot. So keep us abreast on that. And honestly, it's why I wrote the book, right? Is that I was fighting fights like gun reform, LGBTQ rights, inequality. I was working on healthcare for all 20 years ago. I was working 15 years ago. I started working on $15 an hour. So those fights are very, very important. And I wanted to illuminate them in this book, A Life Made from Scratch, because oftentimes as citizens in this country, what we're doing, or even residents in this country, we're building things from scratch, right? And so don't be afraid to do that all over again, and don't be afraid to protect each other. And then sometimes you emerge as a leader after you've done that work, or a little bit of that work even, because I'll tell you, a lot of leaders are not qualified. They're not qualified. They just are willing to do the work and to really be passionate about something. So that's what this country is about, building things from scratch and moving things forward. So I'm hopeful for the future, and I want to leave everybody with a hopeful note.
yes, I'm hopeful for that future
Yeah,
too.
we can do this, folks. This is a very doable situation. In our history, we have had general strikes in the 20s. We had two of them that were highly successful, and they moved us forward to bring up wages and provide benefits for people. And it helped the labor unions get to a point where they could protect people on the job from occupational hazards. So it has done a lot of good. We do have to rise up, though. So and then just remember, once we get past 26, it's greenfield days. Here's what I mean. That's an innovation term. We can look at all these problems we've had and all the things that are broken, and there will be a lot of things broken, but that means we have a clean slate, right? That we can start from scratch and build things that will be tremendous. Our healthcare system will be much better. The federal agencies that we rebuild or change and transform, or have entirely new ones that are appropriate for the time. So please be hopeful, everybody. This is an opportunity to make things better in America and change our government for the better.
Yeah, and I think it's also, thinking about like the groundwork that we need to do today in order to kind of like be prepared, for some of that, because I don't think we can find ourselves like, yeah, waking up in 2026 and starting to think like, oh, what do we need to do now to, think about like, how we can resolve student debt or, exorbitant housing prices or this challenging cost of living. Like, yeah, how can we build those, connections and coalitions and collaborations right now to start, getting out ahead. But I'm grateful that you are helping to lead that charge and also like have that hope and optimism because I think, there's so many folks who can feel like we are in such dark times. And, I think particularly for, this article on Gen Z, like seeing so many of these different outcomes for these, younger Americans trying to make sure that, the younger generations do have that, hope that we can, still bring about change.
We can.
Um, Thanks so much for joining me, Marie. Everyone also go check out Marie's Substack. It is fantastic too, and her book as well. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye.